In the beginning, before memory had a place to rest, and before time could measure its own passing, there was only chaos. It was not the chaos that later tongues would use to describe disorder or clamor, not the wild confusion of battle or the restless noise of a crowded world. This chaos was something older, something far quieter and far more immense. It was a yawning void, a boundless expanse without edge or center, without light or shadow, without form or direction. It did not hunger, nor did it dream. It did not move, nor did it sleep. It simply existed, if such a word can even be trusted when nothing yet had meaning. There was no sky above, no earth below, no sea to ripple or wind to stir. There were no gods watching from afar, no mortals to imagine them, no stars to mark the slow rhythm of eternity. Silence was not even the right word, for silence implies the absence of sound, and sound itself had not yet been born. Chaos was not empty in the way a vessel is empty. It was emptiness itself, vast and unbroken, stretching beyond any thought that would one day try to grasp it. And yet, from this endless stillness, something stirred. It did not happen with a sound, nor with a flash of light. There was no moment that could be marked, no instant that could be named as the beginning. But within chaos, subtle as a breath that had never been taken, the first presences emerged. They did not arrive as creations shaped by hands, for there were no hands to shape them. They came into being as inevitabilities, as truths that had always been waiting within the void. The first of these was Gaia, the earth. She was vast and enduring, her form spreading wide and deep, a foundation where none had existed before. She was solidity in a realm that had known only absence, a presence so complete that it seemed to anchor existence itself. Though there was nothing yet to grow upon her, nothing to walk her surface or burrow within her depths, she held within her the promise of all things to come. She was not merely land or soil. She was stability, the quiet certainty that something could endure. Alongside her came Tartarus, deeper still, a chasm beneath even the idea of ground. If Gaia was the surface, the place of becoming, then Tartarus was the abyss, the unseen depth where shadows would one day gather. It was not evil, not yet, but it carried a weight, a gravity that pulled downward into darkness. It was a place that would later hold monsters and punishment, but in this earliest age, it was simply another truth given form, that beneath all things, there is always a deeper place. Then came Eros, the most mysterious of them all. He was not love as mortals would later know it, not tenderness or longing or the poetry of hearts entwined. He was something far more primal, a force that drew things together, that compelled union where there had been only separation. He was the quiet urge that would allow creation to continue, the unseen thread that would bind one being to another. Without Eros, nothing that followed could have taken shape, for he was the reason things did not remain alone. These first beings were not gods in the way stories would later describe gods. They did not rule, did not command, did not sit upon thrones or cast judgment. They were the bones of existence itself, the earliest structure of a world not yet formed. They did not speak, for language had not yet found its voice, but their presence was enough. Through them, chaos was no longer empty. It had begun, in its own quiet way, to change. From chaos also came Nyx, the night, cloaked in a darkness so deep that even the void seemed to recoil from her presence. She moved without motion, spreading herself like a veil across the formless expanse. With her came Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, a shadow not of absence but of depth, the kind that would one day settle in caves and beneath the earth, where light could not reach. Nyx and Erebus found one another in that silent, unformed world, and from their union came two new presences, delicate yet profound. One was ether, the upper air, bright and pure, a clarity that would one day fill the spaces above the earth. The other was Hera, the day, who carried with her the first suggestion of light, though light itself had not yet taken shape. Thus, without sun or stars, the first rhythm of existence began. Night would follow day, and day would follow night, not through movement across a sky, for there was no sky yet, but through an eternal exchange, a quiet cycle woven into the fabric of being. It was the earliest hint that time, too, would come to exist, not as something measured, but as something felt in the repetition of presence and absence. Gaia, meanwhile, did not remain still. She was fertile not in the sense of growth as mortals understand it, but in a deeper, more essential way. From her own being, without need of another, she brought forth Uranus, the sky. He rose above her, vast and arching, stretching himself across her form until he became a great dome, studded with the faint promise of stars yet to be born. Where Gaia was steady and enduring, Uranus was expansive and ever-reaching. He covered her completely, enclosing her beneath him. And for the first time there was a sense of above and below, of space defined by relation rather than emptiness. The world, if it could yet be called a world, had taken its first true shape. But Gaia's creation did not end there. From her came the mountains, rising like the bones of the earth itself, jagged and immense, silent witnesses to a reality still unfolding. And then came Pontus, the sea, vast and restless even in its infancy, its depths unfathomable, its surface shifting with a will of its own. With earth below, sky above, and sea surrounding, the stage was set for something greater. The void had given way to form, and form to possibility. What had once been nothing had become a place where stories could begin. And though no mortal yet existed to witness it, though no voice yet spoke to name these things, the world had taken its first breath. It was a quiet beginning, almost imperceptible against the vastness from which it had emerged. But within that quiet, something profound had taken root. For the first time, existence was no longer alone. And in that subtle shift, the long story of gods, of men, of love and betrayal and destiny had already begun to unfold. Gaia, vast and enduring, did not rest after bringing forth the sky. There was within her a quiet, ceaseless urge, not of desire, but of becoming. Where chaos had been still and unchanging, Gaia was alive with potential, and that potential sought expression in ways both beautiful and terrible. Uranus, the sky, now stretched endlessly above her, his star-strewn body arching from horizon to horizon, enclosing her in an embrace that was at once intimate and suffocating. Together, they formed the first union of existence, not a marriage born of ceremony or consent, but of inevitability. Earth lay beneath, sky pressed above, and between them, creation stirred. From this union came the first great children of the cosmos, the Titans. They did not arrive as fragile beings, nor as creatures that needed nurturing. They emerged fully formed, vast and elemental, each embodying some aspect of the world that was still taking shape. They were 12 in all, 6 sons and 6 daughters, and though they would later be remembered as a family, in truth, they were closer to forces than to kin. Oceanus was the eldest, a great river that encircled the world, his waters flowing without end, marking the boundary between what was known and what lay beyond. Hyperion followed, radiant with the light that would one day become the sun, his presence warm and unyielding. Coeus was the inquirer, a mind turned always toward the mysteries of the cosmos, while Creus bore the constellations, mapping the heavens long before mortals would look up and wonder. Iapetus stood apart, tied to the fate of humankind not yet born. And then there was Cronus, the youngest of the sons, quiet and watchful, his thoughts hidden behind a patient gaze. Among the daughters were beings no less powerful. Theia shone with a brilliance that would later give birth to the sun and moon. Rhea carried within her a gentleness that masked a deep and enduring strength. Themis embodied divine order, the laws that would one day govern both gods and men. Mnemosyne held memory itself, the keeper of all that had been and all that would be remembered. Phoebe glowed with a subtle prophetic light, and Tethys nourished the waters that would sustain life across the world. Together they formed a generation unlike any that would follow, beings vast, ancient, and deeply woven into the structure of existence. And for a time, it might have seemed that the world had found its balance. But Gaia's womb had not yet emptied its depths. For alongside the Titans, she bore children of a different kind, creatures whose forms were not harmonious, whose presence stirred unease even in the vast heart of the sky itself. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Argus. Each had a single eye set in the center of his forehead, blazing like a forge, burning with a light that hinted at fire and storm. They were immense, their strength unmatched, their nature simple, yet profound. They did not scheme or question. They simply were, as solid and unyielding as the forces they would one day command. Then came the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges. If the Cyclopes was strange, these beings were terrifying beyond measure. Each bore 50 heads and 100 arms, their forms vast and overwhelming, as though Gaia herself had poured all excess of creation into them. When they moved, the very foundations of the world seemed to tremble, and even in their stillness, they carried the suggestion of chaos waiting to be unleashed. It was at the sight of these children that Uranus first knew fear. He, who stretched across the heavens, who had known only dominion and vastness, looked upon the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, not with wonder, but with dread. In their strength, he saw not the promise of creation, but the threat of overthrow. They were too powerful, too strange, too unpredictable. They did not reflect his image, nor did they fit within the order he believed should govern the world. And so, in a decision that would echo through all ages to come, Uranus chose control over acceptance. As each of these monstrous children emerged from Gaia, he forced them back into her depths. He pressed them down into the earth itself, sealing them within her womb, burying them beneath layers of stone and silence. There, in the darkness of Tartarus's reach, they were imprisoned, unable to see the light they had never known, unable to stretch the limbs that had been made for greatness. Gaia felt every moment of it. She was not merely their mother in name. She was their substance, their origin, their very being. To have them forced back inside her was not an act of distance. it was an act of violation. The weight of them pressed against her from within, a constant, unrelenting pain that spread through her vast form. The mountains she had raised seemed to groan. The seas shifted uneasily along her edges. Even the silent air above carried a tension that had not been there before. Night after night, Uranus descended upon her, stretching himself across her body as he always had, blind to her suffering, deaf to the quiet anguish that rippled through her. To him, the world remained as it should be, ordered, controlled, secure beneath his rule. But beneath that illusion, something had begun to change. Gaia endured, for what else could she do? She was the foundation of all things. She could not flee, could not turn away. But endurance is not the same as acceptance, and within her, something new began to take root. It was not the generative force that had brought forth her children, nor the quiet patience that had shaped the world. This was something sharper, something colder. It was the first stirring of defiance. She began to think, not as mortals think, with fleeting ideas and uncertain conclusions, but with the deep, slow certainty of the earth itself. She felt the injustice of Uranus's actions, the imbalance he had created by denying what she had brought into being. The world, still young and fragile, had been shaped by union, by the coming together of forces. But Uranus had chosen division, suppression, fear. And Gaia, who had given everything form, would not allow that to stand forever. Within her pain, a plan began to form. It did not come all at once, nor did it reveal itself in clarity. It grew slowly, like roots pushing through stone, like pressure building beneath the surface until it could no longer be contained. She would not confront Uranus with force alone. She understood him too well for that. His power was vast, his reach absolute. To challenge him directly would be to invite failure. No, the change would have to come from within his own domain, from their children. And so Gaia turned her thoughts toward the Titans, those firstborn who still walked beneath the sky, who had not been cast into darkness. She would speak to them. She would show them what had been done, what had been taken, what had been denied. But even as the idea took shape, she knew the truth that lay at its heart. Not all would listen. Fear had already taken root among them, just as it had in their father. Uranus ruled not only through power, but through the shadow of what he might do to those who defied him. To stand against him would require more than strength. It would require something rarer, something more dangerous. It would require the willingness to act. And somewhere among her children, Gaia knew, there would be one who would answer. One who would step forward when the others turned away. One who would take up the burden of change, no matter the cost. Deep within the earth, the imprisoned giants stirred in their silent chains. Above, the sky stretched wide and watchful, and between them, in the quiet tension of a world not yet broken, but no longer whole, the first seeds of rebellion were sown. The age of peace, if it had ever truly existed, was already beginning to fracture. And though no voice yet spoke it aloud, the balance of the cosmos had begun to tilt. Gaia waited. Time, in those early ages, did not pass as it would later be understood. There were no seasons to mark its turning, no rising and setting sun to measure its rhythm. And yet, there was a sense of gathering, of something approaching its moment. Gaia did not rush, for she was older than urgency itself. Her thoughts moved like stone settling into place, deliberate and unyielding. The pain within her did not fade, it deepened, sharpened, until it became something she could no longer bear in silence. At last she called to her children. The Titans came to her, drawn not by command but by something older, something instinctive. They gathered upon her vast form, standing beneath the endless stretch of Uranus, who remained above them, unaware or perhaps unwilling to see what stirred below. They were mighty, these children of earth and sky, each vast in their own nature, each carrying within them a fragment of the world that was still becoming. And yet, for all their strength, there was hesitation among them, a quiet uncertainty that passed like a shadow from one to the next. Gaia spoke, not with words, as mortals would one day know them, but with a presence that filled them, a truth that could not be ignored. She showed them what Uranus had done. She let them feel the weight of their imprisoned brothers, the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, crushed within her depths, denied the light of existence. She revealed the injustice not as an argument, but as a reality, undeniable and complete. "Your father has wronged me," her presence seemed to say. "He has wronged us all." The Titans shifted. Some turned their gaze away, unwilling to meet the fullness of what was being asked of them. Oceanus, ever flowing and distant, felt the current of events but did not wish to be swept into them. Hyperion, radiant and steady, hesitated beneath the thought of defying the sky itself. Coeus questioned. Creus calculated. Iapetus watched in silence. Among the daughters, there was sorrow, but not yet action. For to act against Uranus was no small thing. He was the sky, vast and all-encompassing. To challenge him was to challenge the very structure of the world as they knew it. Gaia felt their fear, and it did not surprise her. But she had not gathered them for comfort. From within herself, from the very substance of her being, she drew forth something new. It was not a child, nor mountain, nor sea. It was a thing shaped not by growth, but by intent. A weapon. The sickle emerged from her, forged of unyielding flint, its edge jagged and pale, sharp as truth and cold as vengeance. It was unlike anything that had existed before, for until that moment, there had been no need for such things. The world had been shaped by union and emergence, not by violence. But now, something had changed. Gaia offered the sickle to her children. "Who among you will take this?" she asked without voice, "and end what has begun to poison the world?" Silence answered her. One by one the Titans recoiled. It was not cowardice alone that held them back, though fear was certainly there. It was the weight of what such an act would mean. To strike against Uranus was to fracture the order of existence itself. It was to open a wound in the cosmos, one that could never be closed. And so they turned away. All but one. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, stood apart from the others. He'd always been quieter, more watchful. Where his siblings embodied vast and visible forces, Cronus was something suppler. He observed, he listened, he waited. And now, as Gaia's presence pressed upon them all, he did not turn away. There was something in him that the others lacked, not greater strength, nor greater power, but a willingness to step into the unknown, to act where others hesitated. He stepped forward. "I will do it," his silence answered. Gaia felt the shift, the moment when possibility became decision. She placed the sickle into his hands, and though it was a weapon unlike any that had come before, it seemed to belong there, as though it had always been meant for him. The plan was set. Gaia did not rush. She knew Uranus's patterns, knew the way he descended upon her each night, stretching himself across her vast form, pressing sky to earth in an unchanging rhythm. It was in that moment, when he was closest, when his attention was turned inward rather than outward, that he would be most vulnerable. And so she waited. When the time came, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Night spread across existence as Nyx took her place, cloaking all in shadow. Uranus descended, vast and unbroken, settling over Gaia as he always had, unaware that this night would not be like the others. There was no warning, no sign that anything had changed. But beneath him, hidden in the folds of earth and shadow, Cronus waited. He did not hesitate. As Uranus stretched across Gaia, as the sky pressed down upon the earth, Cronus rose from his hiding place. In his hands the sickle gleamed faintly, its edge catching what little light there was. For a moment, just a moment, there was stillness, the final instant before action, where all things hang in balance. Then he struck. The blade cut through the sky itself. A sound followed, though it was not a sound that could be heard in the way later beings would hear. It was a rupture, a tearing of something fundamental. Uranus recoiled, his vast form shuddering as the sickle bit deep, severing that which bound him to Gaia, that which had allowed him to dominate her so completely. For the first time, the sky cried out. It was a cry of pain, of shock, of something more than either. The heavens trembled, and the world below felt the impact of that moment ripple through its very foundations. Uranus pulled away, his endless form retreating upward, no longer pressed against Gaia as he had always been. And in that separation, something new was born. From the wound inflicted by Cronus, drops of divine blood fell upon Gaia. Where they touched her surface, new beings sprang forth, shaped by violence and consequence. The Erinyes, the Furies, emerged first, cloaked in shadow and driven by vengeance, their purpose already etched into their being. They would one day pursue those who committed the deepest crimes, relentless and unyielding. Alongside them came the giants, vast and powerful, their forms echoing the strength of the Titans, but carrying within them a more chaotic force. And from the blood that soaked into the earth, the Meliai were born, nymphs of the ash trees, tied to the wild places where civilization would one day struggle to take root. But the most striking transformation came not from the earth, but from the sea. Cronus, his task complete, cast the severed flesh of Uranus into the waters of Pontus. It fell into the depths, and for a time there was only the slow churn of the sea, the movement of currents around something that did not belong. Then the waters began to foam. White froth rose upon the surface, shimmering with a strange, unnatural light. From that foam, from the mingling of sea and sky and blood, a figure began to take shape. She emerged not with struggle, but with a quiet inevitability, rising from the waves as though she had always been waiting there. Aphrodite. She stepped onto the shore, radiant beyond measure, her beauty both captivating and unsettling. She was born of violence, yet she carried within her the essence of desire, of attraction, of the force that draws all things together. Where Eros had been the unseen impulse, Aphrodite was its embodiment, its living form. The world had changed. Above, Uranus retreated, his form pulling back into the vastness of the heavens, no longer bound to the earth as he had been. Before he vanished completely, his presence lingered, and with it came something else. A curse. Just as I have been cast down by my son, the truth echoed through existence, so too shall he be cast down by his own. It was not merely a threat. It was a pattern, a law now woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Cronus heard it. He stood upon the earth, the sickle still in his grasp, the weight of what he had done settling into him. He had acted where others had not. He had changed the world. And yet, even in that moment of victory, the seed of his own downfall had already been planted. The sky had been separated from the earth. The first ruler had fallen, and the age of the Titans had begun. With Uranus cast into the distant vault of the heavens, no longer pressing himself upon the earth, the world seemed, for a brief and fragile moment, to breathe. Gaia, long burdened by the weight of both her children and her consort, felt a loosening within herself, as though the very fabric of existence had shifted to allow space where once there had been none. The air, newly formed between sky and earth, carried with it a strange stillness, not empty like chaos, but expectant, as if the world itself were waiting to see what would come next. And what came next was rule. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, and now the one who had dared what none other would, rose to take the place left vacant by Uranus. There was no coronation, no ceremony to mark the transition. Power in those days did not require acknowledgement. It simply settled where it was claimed. And Cronus claimed it fully. He stood as king of the cosmos, lord of the heavens and earth alike, his presence stretching across the world that had only just begun to take shape. Around him, the Titans took their places, not as subjects in the way mortals would later understand, but as forces aligned beneath a shared order. The old fear that Uranus had imposed seemed, at first, to fade. In its place came something unexpected: peace. It was not a peace born of treaties or agreements, for such things had not yet been conceived. It was a peace that existed simply because nothing yet opposed it. The world, still young and untested, settled into a rhythm that later ages would remember as golden. Under Cronus's rule, the earth flourished. Gaia, no longer pressed beneath Uranus's constant weight, spread herself freely, her mountains rising in quiet majesty, her valleys deepening, her seas expanding with a restless but harmonious motion. There were no storms of destruction, no wars to scar the land, no cries of suffering to echo across the hills. The very idea of conflict seemed distant, almost impossible. And in this age, something new began to appear: mortal life. They came quietly, as all things had come in those early days. Humanity was not yet the striving, struggling force it would later become. These first mortals lived simply, as though the world itself provided all they could ever need. The earth gave freely. Fruit ripened without cultivation. Rivers flowed clear and abundant, and the air itself seemed to nourish those who breathed it. They did not know hunger as a torment, nor labor as a necessity. There were no kings among them, no walls to divide one from another, no need for laws or punishment. They lived as children might live, in a state of unthinking harmony, untouched by the burdens that would later define their kind. Time for them was gentle. They did not age in the way later mortals would. Their lives passed as though in a long, unbroken day, and when their time came to end, it did not come with pain or fear. They simply lay down as if surrendering to sleep, and passed quietly from the world, leaving behind no trace of suffering. It was an age that would later be called the Golden Age, though no one living within it would have thought to name it so. To them, it was simply existence as it had always been. And above them all, Cronus ruled. At first, he seemed a different kind of ruler than Uranus had been. He did not crush his children beneath the weight of fear, nor did he seek to hide away what he did not understand. The Titans moved freely beneath his dominion, and the world as a whole seemed balanced. But beneath that balance, something lingered. A memory. The words of Uranus, spoken in the moment of his fall, did not fade with time. They remained, echoing within Cronus like a second heartbeat, quiet but persistent. Just as I have been cast down by my son, so too shall he be cast down by his own. It was not merely a curse. It was a truth that had already proven itself. Cronus had overthrown his father, and now the same fate waited for him. At first he tried to ignore it. He ruled, he observed, he allowed the world to continue in its golden peace. But prophecy, once planted, does not remain still. It grows slowly and steadily until it begins to shape the thoughts of the one who carries it. Cronus began to watch more closely. He looked upon his siblings not only as allies, but as potential threats. He listened for whispers that were not there, saw patterns in things that had no meaning. The world had not changed, but his perception of it had. And then, as kings must, he chose a queen. Rhea, his sister, stood apart from the others. She was not the brightest, nor the most forceful, but there was within her a quiet strength, a steadiness that seemed to ground those around her. Where Cronus was sharp and watchful, Rhea was enduring. Where he saw threats, she saw continuity. Their union was not marked by passion, nor by ceremony. It was simply the joining of two forces that, together, would shape what came next. For a time, they ruled side by side, and the world continued in its peace. But the prophecy did not sleep. It waited. And in time, it found its moment. Rhea began to bear children. The first was Hestia, a child of quiet warmth, embodying the hearth, the center of home and stability. When she was placed into Cronus's arms, something stirred within him. Not love, not pride, but fear. The words returned. He did not hesitate. Before Rhea could even understand what he intended, Cronus opened his mouth and swallowed the child whole. There was no struggle, no cry that echoed across the world. One moment the child existed, the next she was gone, consumed and hidden within her father's body, as though she had never been born at all. Rhea stood frozen. She had not expected this. Whatever she had imagined of motherhood, whatever quiet hopes had taken shape within her, they shattered in that instant. Cronus spoke to her, though his words carried little comfort. "It must be done," he said. "I will not suffer the fate of my father." Rhea did not answer. What answer could there be? Time passed, though now it seemed heavier, slower. And again she bore a child. Demeter, gentle and life-giving. Again Cronus took the child. Again he swallowed it without hesitation. Then came Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. Each time the same pattern repeated: birth, hope, and then the swift, merciless act that erased it all. 5 children. 5 times Rhea held life in her arms. 5 times she lost it. The golden age continued around them, untouched by the horror that unfolded at its center. Mortals still lived in peace. The earth still gave freely. The world, from a distance, remained perfect. But within Rhea, something had begun to change. Her sorrow did not fade, it deepened, layer upon layer, until it became something else. Not yet defiance, not yet action, but the quiet beginnings of both. Cronus believed himself secure. Each child swallowed was, to him, a threat removed, a future undone before it could take shape. He trusted in the simplicity of his solution, in the finality of his actions. But he had forgotten something. The world had changed once before, and it would change again. For just as Gaia had once endured until she could endure no longer, Rhea, too, would reach her breaking point. And when she did, the cycle that had begun with Uranus would turn once more. The Golden Age, though it still shone, had begun to crack. And beneath its surface, unseen but inevitable, the next storm was already gathering. Rhea did not weep where Cronus could see her. Grief in those early ages did not always take the form of tears or cries, but hers was no less profound for its silence. It settled deep within her, a weight that grew heavier with each passing moment, with each child taken from her arms and swallowed into the endless dark of their father's body. 5 times she had endured it. 5 times she had felt the fragile warmth of life, only to have it extinguished before it could even begin. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Names that would one day shape the world, now hidden, unseen. Their existence suspended within Cronus, like seeds buried in frozen soil. To Cronus, this was necessity. To Rhea, it was unthinkable. At first, she had been paralyzed by shock, by the sheer impossibility of what she had witnessed. How could a father consume his own children? How could a ruler, who presided over an age of peace, commit such an act without hesitation or remorse? But as the pattern repeated, as each birth ended the same way, her disbelief hardened into something else. Understanding. Not acceptance, never that, but a cold, clear recognition of what Cronus had become. He was no longer merely the Titan who had overthrown Uranus. He had become something shaped by fear, ruled by it, defined by it. The prophecy had not simply warned him, it had consumed him, just as he had consumed their children. And Rhea knew, with a certainty that settled deep into her being, that if nothing changed, the pattern would never end. She would bear another child, and Cronus would take it. Again. But this time, something within her refused. It was not sudden, nor was it loud. It did not come with fury or defiance shouted into the heavens. It came quietly, like a stone placed carefully into a stream, altering its course not with force, but with persistence. She would not let it happen again. When she felt the next child stir within her, she did not go to Cronus. She did not announce the coming birth, nor did she remain within the halls of his rule. Instead, she withdrew, quietly, deliberately, slipping away from the place where her previous children had been taken from her. She sought Gaia, the great mother who had once suffered under Uranus, who had endured the imprisonment of her children and had found a way to end it. Gaia understood. Where others might have hesitated or turned away, Gaia listened. Rhea's presence carried her grief, her fear, her determination. She did not need to speak it aloud. Gaia felt it, just as she had once felt the suffering of her own children. And Gaia answered. The plan that had once been hers, born from pain and necessity, now passed to Rhea. It was not the same plan, for the circumstances had changed, but its essence remained: deception, patience, and the willingness to act where others could not. You must hide the child, Gaia's presence seemed to say, and you must deceive him. Rhea listened. There was no hesitation now. When the time came, She left the domain of Cronus entirely, traveling far from his reach, to a place where even his watchful fear would not easily follow. She went to the island of Crete, where mountains rose high and wild, where deep caves opened into the heart of the earth itself. There, hidden among stone and shadow, she brought her child into the world. Zeus. From the moment of his birth, there was something different about him. It was not merely his strength, though even as an infant there was a force in his small form that seemed disproportionate to his size. It was not merely his presence, though. When he cried, the sound seemed to ripple through the air in a way that no other child's cry had done. It was something deeper, something inevitable. Rhea held him, feeling the weight of him in her arms. And for the first time since her suffering had begun, she allowed herself a moment, not of peace, but of resolve fulfilled. This child would not be taken. This child would live. But living would require more than hiding. Cronus would expect the child. He would demand it. And if she returned empty-handed, suspicion would fall upon her, and the fragile plan would unravel before it had even begun. So Rhea did what she must. She took a stone. It was an ordinary thing, unremarkable in shape or form, but she wrapped it carefully in swaddling cloth, shaping it to resemble the child she had just given birth to. She held it for a moment as though it were real, as though it carried the same life she had just protected. Then she returned. When she stood before Cronus, there was no sign of what she had done. Her face carried the same quiet sorrow it always had, her presence unchanged, her movements steady. "This is our child," she presented. Cronus did not question. Why would he? The pattern had never failed him before. 5 times he had taken what was given, and 5 times it had secured his throne. There was no reason, in his mind, to doubt now. He took the bundle, and as he had done before, he swallowed it whole. The stone passed into him, unseen, unfelt as anything unusual. To him, the act was complete, the threat removed, the future once again secured. Rhea said nothing. She turned away, her heart steady, her secret intact. Far from Cronus's reach, deep within the caves of Mount Ida, Zeus remained hidden. But he was not alone. The nymphs of the island took him in, tending to him with quiet devotion. Among them was Amalthea, the divine goat whose milk would nourish him, whose strength would become his own. From her he drank not only sustenance, but something greater, a resilience, a vitality that would carry him through what was to come. And there were others, too. The Curetes, warriors of the wild, stood guard over the child. When Zeus cried, as all infants do, they did not allow the sound to carry beyond the cave. They danced, clashing their shields and striking their spears, creating a noise so loud, so constant, that it drowned out the cries of the hidden god. Thus, even the sky did not hear him. Time passed. Zeus grew. He did not grow as mortal children would, slowly and uncertainly. His growth was swift, marked by a strength that revealed itself early, by a presence that seemed to expand with each passing moment. He learned not through words or teaching, but through the world itself, the wind through the mountains, the silence of the caves, the quiet watchfulness of those who guarded him. Above, Cronus continued to rule. The Golden Age still held, its surface unmarred, its peace unbroken. But beneath that surface, the truth had already shifted. The pattern that Cronus believed unchangeable had been broken quietly and completely. Deep within him, the 5 children he had swallowed still existed, waiting in the dark. And far from his sight, beyond his knowledge, the sixth child grew stronger with each passing day. The prophecy had not been avoided. It had only been delayed. And as Zeus came of age, the quiet calm of the world began to carry with it a new tension, a subtle change in the air, as though something long awaited was beginning to stir. The golden age still shone, but its end had already been written. In the shadowed heart of Mount Ida, where stone folded inward and the world above seemed distant and unreal, Zeus grew into himself. The cave that sheltered him was no palace of marble or gold, but it was not barren. Its walls shimmered faintly with mineral veins that caught what little light filtered through the narrow openings above, and the air within it carried a stillness that was not empty, but watchful. Outside, the mountain rose in rugged silence, its peaks brushed by wind and cloud, its slopes alive with creatures that knew nothing of kings or prophecy. It was a place removed from the center of power, a place where the world could unfold without the weight of Cronus's gaze. And in that hidden place, Zeus was shaped. He was not raised as a prince, for there was no court to teach him ceremony, no throne to prepare him for rule. Instead, he learned from the rhythms of the land itself. The wind that howled through the mountain passes taught him patience and force, how something unseen could shape the world through persistence alone. The shifting shadows within the cave taught him awareness, the ability to see not only what was present, but what might be hidden just beyond sight. Amalthea, the great goat who nourished him, was more than a source of sustenance. Her presence was steady, grounding, a reminder that strength did not always come from conquest or dominance, but from endurance and care. From her milk, Zeus drew vitality, but from her quiet watchfulness, he learned something subtler, the balance between power and restraint. It was said in later ages that one of Amalthea's horns broke, whether by accident or by fate, and from it came the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, a symbol of endless nourishment. Whether this was truth or embellishment mattered little. What mattered was that Zeus grew not in hunger, but in abundance, his strength building without the desperation that might have twisted it into something cruel. When Amalthea's time ended, as all things must eventually end, Zeus did not forget her. He placed her among the stars, her form woven into the sky he would one day rule. Even in youth he understood memory, understood that power alone did not shape the world. What was remembered, what was honored, mattered just as much. Around him the Curetes remained ever vigilant. They were not gentle guardians. Their presence was sharp, their movements deliberate, their lives bound to the singular purpose of protecting the child who would one day change the world. They danced not for joy, but for necessity, their shields clashing in practiced rhythm, their noise a barrier against discovery. To an outsider, their actions might have seemed chaotic, but there was precision in it, a discipline that mirrored the very balance Zeus was learning within himself. From them he learned another lesson. Strength was not only in the body, but in unity. No single Curetica could have protected him alone. It was their combined effort, their willingness to act as one, that kept him hidden. It was a lesson that would not be forgotten, though in time it would be tested in ways none of them could yet imagine. As Zeus grew, so too did his awareness. He began to understand that the world he inhabited was not the whole of existence. There were whispers, carried in the wind or murmured in the quiet conversations of the nymphs, of a greater world beyond the mountain. A world ruled by Cronus, a world where something was wrong. It was not told to him all at once. The truth came in fragments. A mention of siblings he had never met. A shadow in Rhea's voice when she spoke of the past. A silence that lingered too long whenever the name of Cronus was spoken. Piece by piece, the story formed within him, until it could no longer be ignored. He was not merely a child hidden for safety. He was a child hidden for a reason. And that reason was tied to something far larger than himself. It was Gaia who came to him then, not in form, not as a figure standing before him, but as a presence that filled the world around him. The ground beneath his feet seemed to hum with her awareness, the air itself carrying the weight of her attention. She had not forgotten. The imprisonment of the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires still lingered within her, their presence a constant reminder of a wrong not yet fully corrected. Cronus had overthrown Uranus, but he had not freed those who remained bound. The cycle had turned, but it had not been broken. And now, she turned her attention to Zeus. She showed him what had come before, not as a story, but as a truth that unfolded within him. He saw Gaia suffering under Uranus, felt the weight of the imprisoned giants, witnessed the moment of rebellion when Cronus had taken the sickle and changed the world. He saw, too, what had followed, the swallowing of his siblings, the quiet despair of Rhea, the illusion of peace that masked a deeper imbalance. And then, she showed him what must come next. It was not a command. Gaia did not force him, did not shape his will to match her own. She revealed the path, but it was his to choose. Zeus understood. He was the answer to a question that had been asked long before his birth. He was the continuation of a pattern, but also its possible end. The prophecy that haunted Cronus was not merely a warning. It was a reflection of something deeper, a cycle that would continue unless something changed. And change required action. But action alone would not be enough. Cronus was not Uranus. He was not blind, nor was he unthinking. He had already proven himself capable of decisive, ruthless action. To confront him directly, without preparation, would be to fail. Zeus needed more than strength. He needed cunning. It was then that Gaia guided him to another, Metis, Titaness of wisdom. Metis did not dwell in the open. Her presence was subtle, her mind sharp and ever-moving. Where others embodied forces of the world, she embodied thought itself. The ability to see beyond the immediate, to understand not only what was, but what could be. She received Zeus not as a child, but as something already in motion. "You know why you are here," her presence seemed to say. Zeus did not deny it. He listened. Metis spoke of Cronus, not as a tyrant to be overthrown, but as a problem to be solved. She understood the nature of fear, how it could shape actions, how it could blind even the most powerful. Cronus feared his children, and in that fear, he had created his own weakness. "He has taken them into himself," she explained. "But what is taken can be returned." The idea was simple, but its execution would not be. Together, they devised a plan. It would not begin with war. War would come, but first, there must be preparation. First, Cronus must be undone from within, just as Uranus had been undone before him. Zeus would return. Not as a challenger, not yet, but as something else. He would enter Cronus's domain unseen, unrecognized, and he would bring with him the means to break the pattern that had held for so long. A potion. Crafted by Metis, it was no ordinary substance. It carried within it the power to disrupt, to force that which had been swallowed to return. It was not violence, not in the way the sickle had been, but it was no less potent. With it, Cronus would be made to release what he had taken. And when that happened, the world would change. Zeus took the plan into himself, feeling its weight, its inevitability. The time for hiding had ended. The child who had been raised in secret, who had grown in the quiet shelter of the mountain, now stood at the edge of something far greater. The world beyond the cave, beyond the mountain, awaited him. And with it, the beginning of a war that would reshape everything. Above, Cronus still ruled, unaware. Below, in the depths of his own being, 5 children still waited. And between them, unseen but inevitable, the hand of fate moved closer to its moment. Zeus stepped forward. The storm had begun to gather. Zeus did not descend from the mountain as a conqueror. There were no thunderclaps to announce his coming, no tremor in the earth to signal the arrival of something destined to reshape the world. He left Mount Ida as he had lived upon it, quietly, deliberately, carrying within him a purpose that did not need spectacle to prove its weight. The wind followed him down the slopes, whispering through stone and pine, as though even the unseen forces of the world recognized that something had shifted. Below, the domain of Cronus remained unchanged in appearance. The Golden Age still held its gentle illusion. The earth gave freely, the skies remained calm, and mortals, unaware of the tensions beneath the surface, continued their lives untouched by struggle or want. To any who looked upon the world from a distance, it would have seemed perfect. But perfection, Zeus now understood, could be a fragile thing. He moved through this world not as a prince returning to claim his birthright, but as a stranger. Disguised, diminished in form, he entered the presence of Cronus without drawing attention, his true nature hidden beneath the surface. The king of the Titans, for all his power, did not see him for what he was. Fear had made Cronus vigilant, but only in certain ways. He watched for threats that resembled what he feared. He guarded against strength, against defiance, against open challenge. But he did not expect subtlety. He did not expect something small, something quiet, something that did not announce itself as danger. And so Zeus was allowed to come near. Metis's potion was prepared with care, its nature hidden beneath the guise of something harmless. It was offered to Cronus as a gift, as sustenance, as nothing more than a passing indulgence. The Titan king, accustomed to taking what was given without question, accepted it as he had accepted everything else. He drank. At first, there was no change. Cronus remained as he had always been, vast and unshaken, his presence stretching across the world with the same quiet authority. But within him, something had begun to move. It was subtle at first, a disturbance, a shift in the stillness that had long defined his inner being. Then it grew, spreading outward, disrupting the unnatural balance he had imposed upon himself. The children he had swallowed stirred. For ages they had remained within him, suspended in darkness, neither alive in the world nor gone from it. They had not grown, had not changed, had not even fully understood their own existence. But now, something called them back. Cronus felt it. The first sensation was unfamiliar, an unease that did not come from outside, but from within. He had feared external threats, had guarded against forces that might rise against him. But this was something he could not easily confront. The unease became discomfort. The discomfort became pain. And then, without warning, it became something he could no longer contain. Cronus convulsed. The world itself seemed to react as the great Titan king doubled over, his form trembling with a force that rippled through the very fabric of existence. The skies shifted, the earth beneath stirred, and for the first time since his rise to power, Cronus lost control. From within him, something forced its way out. Hestia emerged first, not as an infant, but as a fully formed goddess, her presence warm and steady, her being untouched by the long imprisonment she had endured. She stepped into the world as though she had always belonged there, her essence carrying the quiet strength of the hearth. Then came Demeter, life and growth following in her wake, her presence bringing with it the promise of harvest and renewal. Hera followed, regal and unyielding, her gaze sharp, her presence commanding even in her first moment of freedom. Hades came next, silent and watchful, his nature already turned toward the unseen depths of existence. And then Poseidon, his presence vast and restless, carrying with him the force of the sea itself. 5 gods, reborn into a world that had moved on without them. They stood together, not as children reunited, but as beings awakened, their awareness immediate, their understanding instinctive. They did not need to be told what had been done to them. The truth was already within them, as clear as the air they now breathed. And before them stood Zeus. For a moment there was stillness. 6 siblings, brought together not by time, but by necessity. The connection between them was immediate, undeniable, a bond formed not through shared experience, but through shared fate. Cronus, meanwhile, staggered. The act of expulsion left him shaken in a way no external force ever had. The certainty that had once defined him cracked, revealing something beneath it, something raw and unsteady. The prophecy. It had begun. He looked upon the children he had tried to erase, and for the first time, the fear that had driven him was no longer abstract. It stood before him, fully realized. Zeus did not speak. He did not need to. The moment spoke for itself. Cronus's gaze shifted, his awareness sharpening as he began to understand what had been done. The stranger he had allowed into his presence, the one he had not recognized, now stood revealed. Not a servant, not an insignificant figure, but the one he had failed to destroy. The one he had never known existed. Rage followed swiftly. It rose within Cronus, burning away the uncertainty, replacing it with something more familiar. If fear had shaped him, then anger now gave him direction. He had been deceived, undone not by force but by cunning. And that, more than anything, demanded response. The Golden Age shattered. It did not happen with a single moment, not in a way that could be marked by a clear dividing line. But the peace that had defined the world began to fracture, the illusion giving way to something more volatile, more uncertain. Cronus called upon the Titans. His brothers and sisters, those who had once stood with him beneath Uranus, now gathered once more. Some came willingly, bound by loyalty or shared interest. Others came because they understood that the balance of the world had shifted, and neutrality was no longer an option. Oceanus remained apart, distant as ever, unwilling to be drawn into the conflict. But the others, Cuius, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, answered the call. On the other side, Zeus stood with his siblings. They were fewer, newly freed, their strength real but untested. They had not ruled, had not commanded, had not yet proven themselves in the way the Titans had. But they carried something the Titans no longer possessed: momentum. The world had already begun to change in their favor. And so, without formal declaration, without ceremony or agreement, the war began. It would come to be known as the Titanomachy. But in that first moment, it was simply the inevitable clash of two forces that could no longer coexist. Zeus looked upon Cronus, and in that gaze was no hesitation. The time for hiding had passed. The time for action had come. Above them, the sky darkened. The first storm of the new age gathered. The war did not begin with a single strike. There was no trumpet, no signal carried across the heavens to mark its beginning. Instead, it unfolded as inevitability, like a storm that had long been gathering finally breaking upon the world. The tension that had built through ages of silence and suppressed fear now erupted, not in chaos, but in something far more terrible. Purpose. The Titanomachy had begun. At first, the clash was scattered, uncertain. The Olympians, newly freed and only just awakened to their strength, faced titans who had ruled since the shaping of the world. Cronus's forces were vast, their power ancient and deeply rooted. They gathered at Mount Othrys, their stronghold, a place heavy with age and authority. From there they looked upon the rising challenge with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Across the world, Zeus and his siblings took their stand upon Mount Olympus. It was not yet the shining seat of divine rule it would later become. Its slopes were wild, its peaks sharp and unclaimed, its heights untouched by the grandeur that would one day define it. But it stood high, higher than Othrys, and in that height was a quiet symbolism. The new generation did not yet possess the weight of history, but they possessed something else. Possibility. The first battles came swiftly. Lightning did not yet belong to Zeus, but the sky itself seemed to respond to his presence, clouds gathering in restless formations as he moved. Poseidon stirred the seas, raising waves that crashed against the edges of the land with growing force. Hades moved unseen, his presence felt more than seen, a shadow threading through the chaos of conflict. The Titans answered with equal force. Hyperion's light burned across the sky. Coeus and Creus shaped the heavens themselves, their influence bending the stars into patterns of war. Iapetus stood like an unbreakable pillar, enduring, relentless. And at the center of it all, Cronus remained, vast and immovable, his presence anchoring his forces with the same certainty that had once defined his rule. The world trembled. Mountains cracked under the strain of clashing power. The seas surged beyond their bounds, swallowing land and reshaping coastlines. Fire erupted from the depths of the earth, as though Tartarus itself stirred in response to the violence above. The sky darkened not with night, but with smoke and ash, the very air thick with the force of opposing wills. For a time, neither side gained ground. The Olympians were strong, but they were new to war on this scale. The Titans were powerful, but they were bound by patterns long established, their strength vast, but not always adaptable. The battles raged across the world, each clash leaving scars that would never fully fade. Years passed. Not years as mortals would later count them, but cycles of conflict, stretches of time marked only by the continuation of battle. 10 years, the poets would later say, though such a measure could never fully capture the reality of it. 10 years of storm and fire. 10 years of a world caught between what had been and what might be. And still, the war did not end. Zeus stood at the center of it, his strength growing with each passing clash, his understanding of war sharpening. He learned quickly, adapting in ways the Titans did not expect. But even he began to see the truth. This war could not be won by strength alone. Cronus had made mistakes, but he was not weak. The Titans, for all their rigidity, were not easily overcome. The balance held, and as long as it held, the war would continue indefinitely, grinding the world beneath it. It was Gaia who saw the answer. She had watched from the beginning, her awareness stretching through every crack in the earth, through every tremor that shook her vast form. She felt the strain of the war, the damage it wrought upon the world she had brought into being. And she knew that if it continued unchanged, it would not merely decide who ruled, it would destroy everything. So she spoke again. Not aloud, but in the deep, unshakable way that only she could. She reached Zeus, her presence grounding him even as the storm of battle raged around him. "You are not yet strong enough," her truth pressed into him. "But strength is not all that remains." She reminded him of what had been left undone. Deep beneath the earth, in the darkness of Tartarus, the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires still lay imprisoned. Cronus had not freed them when he overthrew Uranus. He had left them buried, just as his father had done, fearing their power, unwilling to risk their presence in the world above. It was a mistake. And now, it could become his undoing. Zeus understood immediately. The war had been fought with the forces already present, with the Titans and the Olympians clashing in open conflict. But there were powers yet untouched, forces that had been denied their place in the world. If they were freed, the balance would break. Zeus gathered his siblings. There was no hesitation among them now. They had seen enough of war to understand what was required. Together they descended, not into battle, but into the depths. The journey to Tartarus was not simple. It was not a place meant to be reached easily, nor a place that welcomed those who sought it. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, the light fading until even the memory of brightness seemed distant. The ground itself felt different, as though it resisted their passage, as though it remembered those who had been cast into its depths and sought to keep them there. At last, they reached it. Tartarus stretched before them, vast and terrible, a prison carved into the very foundations of existence. Its gates were sealed, its walls unyielding, its silence heavy with the presence of those within. But Zeus did not turn back. With his siblings beside him, he broke the gates. The sound of it was not merely a crash or a shattering, it was a release, a rupture in something long held in place. The chains that bound the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires fell away, their weight finally lifted after ages of imprisonment. For a moment, there was stillness. Then they rose. The Cyclopes emerged first, their single eyes burning with the light that had not dimmed despite their long confinement. They did not rage, nor did they hesitate. They recognized what had been done for them, and in that recognition, they chose gratitude. The Hecatoncheires followed, their vast forms unfolding, their 100 arms stretching outward as though reclaiming the space that had been denied them. Their presence alone shifted the balance of the world, their power immense, their fury ancient, but now directed. They stood with Zeus, not as servants, but as allies. And in return, they gave him something that would change everything. The Cyclops, masters of the forge, took their knowledge and shaped it into weapons unlike any that had existed before. For Zeus, they crafted the thunderbolt, a force drawn from the very essence of sky and storm, a weapon that could tear through anything, swift and absolute. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a symbol of dominion over the sea, capable of stirring the depths or calming them at will. For Hades, they created the helm of darkness, a gift that would allow him to move unseen, to become a shadow even among shadows. Armed with these, the Olympians returned, and the war changed. The next clash was not like those that had come before. When Zeus hurled his first thunderbolt, the sky itself seemed to split open, the force of it cutting through the air with a brilliance that had never before existed. The Titans faltered, not in fear, but in surprise. This was new. This was something they had not accounted for. The Hecatonchires joined the battle, their 100 arms hurling mountains as though they were stones, their strength overwhelming, their presence unstoppable. The ground itself became a weapon in their hands, reshaped and cast against the Titans with relentless force. The balance broke. The war, which had stretched endlessly without resolution, now turned. And for the first time, the end came into view. The war did not end in a single moment, nor in a final clash that silenced all others. It ended as great things often do, not with suddenness, but with inevitability. The balance had shifted, and once it had shifted, it could not be restored. The Titans, who had once stood unchallenged at the foundation of the world, now found themselves pressed back, step by step, their strength still vast, but no longer enough to hold against what had been unleashed. Zeus stood at the forefront of that change. The thunderbolt, newly forged and terrible in its power, became an extension of his will. Where it struck, the air itself seemed to tear apart, light and force intertwined in a way the world had never before witnessed. It was not merely a weapon. It was a declaration. The sky no longer belonged to the old order. It answered to him. Poseidon moved beside him, the sea rising at his command, waves towering and crashing with a fury that reshaped the edges of the land. Where the Titans had once seen the ocean as a boundary, a distant force beyond their immediate concern, it now surged into the heart of battle, a living presence that refused to be ignored. And Hades, silent, unseen, moved through it all like a shadow. The helm of darkness cloaked him, allowing him to strike without warning, to pass through the chaos of war without being caught in it. He did not announce his presence, did not challenge openly. He simply acted, and where he acted, the Titans faltered. But it was not the Olympians alone who brought the war to its end. The Hecatonchires became the turning point. Their 100 arms moved with relentless force, each motion carrying the weight of ages spent in confinement, each strike driven by a fury that had been held in silence for too long. They did not tire. They did not hesitate. They hurled mountains, tore apart the landscape, and battered the Titans with a force that no single being could withstand. The Cyclopes, too, played their part, their presence reinforcing the power of the Olympians, their creations shaping the very nature of the battle. The weapons they had forged did more than strike. They changed the way war itself was fought. Against this, the Titans began to fall. Not all at once, not without resistance. Cronus and his kin did not surrender easily. They had ruled the cosmos for ages beyond counting, and their strength was not something that could be erased in a single blow. They fought with everything they were, drawing upon the deep, ancient forces that defined them. Hyperion's light burned fiercely. Coeus and Creus shaped the heavens in defiance. Iapetus stood unyielding against the onslaught. But even as they fought, it became clear that the tide had turned too far. Cronus saw it. He stood at the center of the conflict, as he had always done, his presence still vast, still commanding. But the certainty that had once defined him was gone. The prophecy he had feared, the one he had tried to prevent through such desperate means, had come to pass. Not in the way he had expected. Not through a single child rising suddenly against him, but through a series of choices, of actions, of consequences that had built upon one another until they could no longer be undone. He had swallowed his children to prevent his downfall. And in doing so, he had created the very conditions that made it inevitable. Still, he fought. There was no retreat in him, no surrender. If he was to fall, he would fall as he had lived, unbending, unyielding, his will intact even as the world shifted around him. The final battles were terrible. The sky was no longer clear, but torn apart by storm and fire. The earth cracked beneath the strain, its surface reshaped by the force of clashing powers. The sea surged beyond its bounds, swallowing land and retreating again in endless cycles of destruction. The world, still young, bore the scars of its first great war. At last, the end came. It did not arrive with ceremony, nor with a final declaration. It came when the Titans, one by one, were overcome. Their strength no longer enough to hold against the combined force of the Olympians and their allies. Cronus was among the last. When he fell, it was not with a cry, nor with a dramatic gesture. It was with the quiet, undeniable finality of something that had reached its end. The power that had once defined him did not vanish, but it was no longer his to command. Zeus stood before him. There was no need for words. The outcome had already been decided. And so, as Uranus had once been cast down, so too was Cronus. But Zeus did not repeat the past exactly. He did not destroy the Titans. He imprisoned them. Deep within Tartarus, the same abyss that had once held the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, the Titans were cast down. The gates were sealed behind them, not with fear, but with intention. The Hecatonchires, once prisoners themselves, now became their wardens, their 100 hands ensuring that the Titans would not rise again. It was a choice, a decision that reflected both continuity and change. Zeus had overthrown his father, as his father had overthrown his own. The pattern had held. But where Uranus had acted out of fear, and Cronus out of paranoia, Zeus acted with something different. Control. The Titans were not erased. They were contained. Not all of them, however, shared that fate. Prometheus and Epimetheus, sons of Iapetus, had chosen differently during the war. They had sided with Zeus, guided by foresight and understanding, rather than loyalty to the old order. For this, they were spared. Themis, too, who embodied divine law, recognized the necessity of the new order and aligned herself with it. She remained free, her presence ensuring that the structure of the world would not collapse into chaos once more. Thus, the war ended. The sky cleared. The storms that had raged for so long began to fade, the air settling into a new stillness. The earth, scarred but enduring, began the slow process of healing. The seas calmed, their waves returning to a rhythm no longer driven by conflict. For the first time since chaos had given way to form, the world stood under a new order. Zeus rose as its ruler. Not by birthright, not by inheritance, but by victory. The throne of the cosmos, once held by Uranus, then by Cronus, now belonged to him. But even as he stood at the height of his power, the shadow of what had come before remained. The curse of Uranus had been fulfilled. The cycle had turned once more. And though Zeus had chosen a different path in how he dealt with those he defeated, the truth remained unchanged. Power, once taken, must always be defended. For the pattern of the world, once set in motion, does not easily come to rest. And somewhere, beyond even the reach of the heavens, the quiet possibility of what might come next lingered, waiting, as it always had, for its moment. When the war at last fell silent, the world did not immediately rejoice. There was no sudden return to the easy peace of the Golden Age, no effortless healing that erased what had been done. The scars of the Titanomachy remained, etched into the bones of the earth and the memory of the sky. Mountains stood fractured where they had once been whole. The seas carried the restless echo of battles fought upon their surface, and the air itself seemed to remember the weight of thunder and fire.